Okay, there we go. So, how would you like to proceed?
Well, I think we have lots of questions, a couple of questions I'd like to ask, or you could just...
No, questions are fine. Questions are fine. It's an honest way to make a living, right? Answering questions.
Maybe I'll just quickly introduce the students, or if you want to just quickly say your name.
I'm Jackson.
Hey, Jackson.
Ethan.
What's that?
Ethan.
Ethan.
Yes.
I'm Emma.
Hey, Emma.
Hi. Okay, should we start maybe with some questions?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you like.
Sure. So we've been reading your Gita, and we've gone over the a little bit of the first 3 chapters, and then we're almost finished the translation of chapter 2. And I think Ethan, did you want to start with a couple of questions, or Jackson, whatever reason from that?
Sure.
Jackson, if you could just move over a little bit toward Ethan, I could see you. There you go. There's good old Emma.
Okay. First of all, on a light note, celibacy seems pretty not very fun. Why exactly do you choose to pursue it?
Why do I choose to do what?
Be celibate.
Oh, be celibate. I guess I just wanted to go along with everybody else nowadays. Just kidding. Okay, so the first question is why I chose to be celibate. That's a good question.
I was explaining to the charity of the significance of what it means to be a sannyasi and what,
Right.
the categories that go along
Right.
with that.
Okay, I guess, the first thing I would say, and then I'll, of course, try to explain it, is that at a certain point in my life, I felt it was in my rational self-interest. So then the question is, why did I come to that conclusion? That very much a minority conclusion. Well, when I was your age, when I was younger, I was a student at Berkeley. I'm from California, and so I did actually have a, pretty good amount of experience of non-celibacy, and then I joined the Hare Krishna movement. Right, still trying to figure that one out, and so then I, after I'd been in the movement about 1.5 years, I married, and so I also experienced that briefly. Married life. I had an excellent wife, and we're still good friends. I guess I was not simply experiencing so much pleasure in my spiritual practice of bhakti yoga, but it was a certain kind of pleasure. It wasn't just sort of a blind, pleasurable sensation like something out of Brave New World, but there's a kind of happiness which comes with understanding that you see something that's true, that's significantly true. And the pleasure is really inseparable from the awareness, the realization, the knowledge. And so, especially because the whole thing is meant to understand that we're not the body, that we're actually eternal souls. And so, so I would say the general attitude toward bodily pleasure, or the attitude that Krishna teaches in the Gita, is that in moderation it's necessary. We have material bodies, we have a certain, you could say, human reality, and the body has needs, the body has desires, and so what Krishna teaches is that to satisfy your bodily desires in moderation. And of course, that changes from person to person. For example, let's say someone is a really advanced athlete. What they call a good workout may not be what it is for other people. let's say for an average person, a good workout may be, maybe a half hour vigorous exercise, or at most an hour. But for a really trained athlete, that may be just a warm up. And so even in the university, I mean, there's undergraduate, graduate, there's all these different levels. There's introductory courses, there's advanced courses, and so on. And so I think of bhakti yoga as like, it's like spiritual training. Just like if you're getting your body into shape through, I don't know, workouts or yoga, whatever you're doing, you start it wherever you're at, and then you hope to advance. And as you achieve a higher state of fitness, then, what it takes to give you a good workout may be more than it was before. So I reached a point in my spiritual life where the idea of traveling around the world and trying to give people this knowledge was just thrilling to me. It was, I just couldn't imagine anything I'd rather do than that. I mean, just talking to you now is a pleasure. So in Krishna consciousness, and frankly, in most parts of the world up until recently, the highest physical intimacy between two people, which is sexual intercourse, was seen as something which is reserved for people who have made a serious commitment to each other. And in a sense, if a person thinks highly of themselves, not in a narcissistic way, but in the sense of recognizing that actually, you are something extraordinary, an eternal spiritual being. And that is so, it's such an amazing thing that you start to take yourself more seriously. And you start to place much more value and importance on the decisions you make in life. And when you have something really valuable, you don't want to lose it. If someone is, what's that old Bob Dylan song, Like a Rolling Stone? Do you guys know that?
Yeah.
You do? Whew, there's some hope. So I remember when I first heard that song, actually I must have been about 16 or something, and I was cruising the Sunset Strip. That's what you did. In LA, you never actually meet anybody because the city was just so spaced out, but you always entertained the false hope that you would meet someone. So anyway, I was with some friends, we were cruising on the Sunset, driving down the Sunset Strip, and that song came on the radio, because in those days, you didn't stream music or download music, or if it wasn't you had two choices. You could go out and buy a vinyl record, or you could listen to the radio. Those were the only two choices. So that song came on, Like a Rolling Stone, and actually, as soon as I heard it, I knew, wow, this is something different. I knew it was kind of like, this is a different kind of song. But anyway, one of the lines in the song is, when you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. And so, it's a very common psychological and even sociological phenomenon that people that feel completely disempowered take more risk, and they're, because they feel they have nothing to lose. And so, like people in Iraq right now, if you're following the news, all these, actually all around the world, in Chile. Of course, we have some close associates in Santiago, so they're kind of keeping me abreast of that. But all over the world now, people are just, just losing their patience with terrible, corrupt governments. But anyway, when you do have something, when you've got a lot, when you feel that you've somehow received something of extraordinary value, then you want to protect it very carefully, whether it's a relationship, someone, let's say, who for a long time was lonely or just not satisfied in their relationships, and then you meet someone you can truly love and that truly loves you, then you value that relationship so much that you're very careful not to in any way endanger that relationship, because you want to preserve it. Or let's say someone was suffering because of poverty, and then somehow they they get some money and their life changes, and they value it, and they're very careful not to waste it, not to lose it. So when you receive an extraordinary gift of higher consciousness, then you place great value on it, and you realize that it would be a disaster to lose it, because you compare that higher consciousness with what you used to experience, and you realize that I can't go back to the way I was, because it would be tragic, because what I have now is so much greater. And so you protect that higher consciousness, and you realize that certain kinds of behavior will in fact cause you to forfeit that consciousness. And so I think it's in that spirit. It's really in the spirit of pursuing one's rational self-interest that people agree to adopt certain principles. For example, let's say if someone's trying out for the Olympics, I mean, their dream in life is to win an Olympic medal, and their friends want to go out to the bar every night, and just booze up and stay out all night. They're not going to do that. If someone's really serious, or the same thing, let's say you're serious about your career, you're serious about your family. Let's say you marry, you have children, and when you have children, of course, everything changes if you're a good parent. And so there are certain things in life that are so valuable that you'll do whatever it takes to protect them, to preserve them, and not to lose them. And so I think it was in that spirit that I adopted a serious spiritual practice, not because of any type of fanatical sentiment. I actually have a natural aversion to fanaticism of any kind, whether it's related to Krishna or anyone else. And but that's it. So as far as taking a vow of celibacy, which I did after, I would say, a significant amount of experience, I became absolutely convinced that this is completely in my self-interest. This will lead me to the greatest possible happiness, and on various levels, it will fulfill my deepest desires. And if I hadn't felt that based on my own experience, I never would have done it.
What do you think it is about sex that puts you out of the consciousness?
What was there about sex? Okay. First of all, sex is not bad or evil or nasty. It's just something that bodies do. However, sex is perhaps the most intense material pleasure. And people could debate that, but it would definitely be a strong candidate for most intense material pleasure. And so there's recreational sex, of course, and there's reproductive sex. And of course, there can be reproductive sex just because two people are really bored with each other, but they want a child. But then there's reproductive sex, which is done in a spirit of service to God. And so if, as is the case, I'm trying to understand myself as an eternal soul, different than the body, then if I immerse myself in bodily consciousness, if I become attached to the body, then I lose that consciousness. For example, let's say someone's a public official, but they're very attached to their family, so they engage in nepotism or all kinds of corruption. In other words, just your normal contemporary political system. So I think the whole thing about sex, I would appeal here to a larger, more universal principle, and that is your ability to be objective about your own self-interest, about your duty to others, about what's right and wrong. Your ability to be lucid and objective is compromised by bodily attachment. For example, if you are being interviewed for a jury, of course, you can be disqualified for things like being intelligent. I don't know if you know about jury selection, but lawyers actually, they want people they can manipulate. So if you sound intelligent, they will not want you on the jury. But if they're selecting a jury, and let's say some man is accused of murder and his mother wants to be on the jury, that's not going to happen, at least not in every part of America. So why? I mean, why can't someone's mother be on the jury? Because of that attachment, or their wife, or if it's a woman, their husband, or their child, or their parents. Because it's understood, even in civil society, that attachment is in tension with objectivity. And so, for example, let's say some kid is applying to get into a college. A relative of that student can't be on the admissions committee. So, I mean, it's just a universally recognized principle that there is a tension between, even a contradiction between, objectivity, total fairness, and attachment. And so it's the same thing. Sex is not bad. It's like everything else. It's good at the right time and place. And it's bad at the wrong time and place, like everything else. So, and we can directly experience that. We can directly experience that if someone is engaged in spiritual life, and let's say they kind of slip, and they are not able to strictly follow their principles, and so they do something against the principles. They directly experience that. So it's really a spiritual science. It's not. I mean, we're not just prudish, or, we think the body is somehow dirty and bad. By the way, I don't know if you know where that came from, but St. Augustine of Hippo, before he embraced Christianity, and we're talking about probably the most influential, he's considered the most influential Christian theologian for many, many centuries. In the basically throughout the Middle Ages and for many centuries. So before he actually became a Christian, like his mother was Santa Monica, Saint Monica, if you want to know where the beach name came from. So anyway, he was a Manichaean. That was an ancient group, the Manichaeans, who followed a Persian prophet named Mani, who was trying to solve the problem of evil, the philosophical problem of evil. Like, if there's a God, why is there so much bad stuff in this world? And so Mani had a very provocative answer to that question. He said the reason is because actually the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Jesus, the God of, God, who created this world, is actually the devil. And therefore the world is intrinsically evil, our bodies are evil, and et cetera, et cetera. And Mani, of course, died prematurely because of his philosophy was so provocative. But so this Augustine, for 10 years as an adult, Augustine was obviously a really smart guy, although, I mean, emotionally, I don't know. He was the first official Christian leader, bishop of Hippo, that actually advocated, who quite misogynistic, and he was the first one to officially advocate that we should kill heretics. So, kind of a complex figure there. So he becomes a Christian, but if as a young adult for 10 years you're in some movement, you never really get fully away from it. You start to get this stuff, with Augustine, that the body's kind of bad, and therefore women are like yuck, and all this stuff which is not really healthy. And by the way, just as another side of this, then I'll get back to, but this is just sort of a little interesting bit of classical history, and that is Augustine also advocated, and he was a very literate person. So when I say advocated, I mean he wrote some really impressive essay on the subject. He advocated infant baptism. And why he advocated, of course, is connected to all this. Because in the first few centuries of Christianity, baptism was very much like initiation, let's say, for example, in our spiritual tradition or others, in the sense that you make a vow. Even the word devotee, of course, in the Latin devoto, which means by a vow, voto. And so initiation meant that you take a vow, a sacred vow, and then you follow it. And so to be baptized as a Christian, you had to vow to be, chaste, sex only in marriage, and all kinds of things. So that's why Constantine, the Roman emperor who kind of popularized Christianity and very clever marketing strategy, he would punish you if you didn't do it. So anyway, he refused himself baptism until his deathbed because he said, hey, I'm an emperor, I kill people and I have lots of women, so I can't be baptized. So anyway, so that was baptism. But then when you bring in this philosophy, how the body is so, it's like horrible and we're so evil and we're fallen and God despises us, but he may save us anyway if we're lucky. I mean, if you look at the sermons of John Edwards of Yale University, early 1700s, I mean, it's unbelievable. He was like a real Puritan preacher that you are repulsive, you are disgusting, God loathes you, he abhors the sight of you. And but the upshot of all that, like the conclusion of all that loathing and disgustingness, the upshot of it is that you can't save yourself. You can't practice spiritual life. You can't practice bhakti yoga because you're just so disgusting that you're always, you can't help yourself. Therefore, why not baptize infants? Because they can't purify themselves anyway. They can never really earn their salvation. So it was kind of a, I remember when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, I had this really good class in early Christian history. And the professor was saying how this philosophy kind of cut a vital nerve in the Christian movement because baptism, becoming a Christian, was just something you were born into. It's not like you earned it. It's not like it lost its value. It's not like you say you win a trophy because you're a great athlete or you win an academic prize or you just, you really earn something and it means something to you. So infant baptism kind of cut that nerve. Anyway, how do I get into all that? So getting back to the Hare Krishna forum here. So the point here is that we accept that you, as an intelligent soul, with you with intrinsic spiritual understanding, if you care to revive it, that you can advance by your own diligence, by your own sincerity. You can make spiritual advancement. And therefore, we just, I would say in a sense of a spiritual science, we calculate, any activity. Is this activity my rational self-interest? I always say that, I have actually a proof of God. And that is, the proof of God is that I survived my teenage years, that I'm still alive because, anyway. So now also it depends on how much we have to lose. Again, if you think that, let's say, for example, in your life, there's no great ecstasy in your life, you're not seeing God, you're not having super spiritual experiences, you're just a college student. And, you're not depressed, but you're not ecstatic. It's just life. And so you may think, well, it's no big deal. If I follow this principle or don't follow this principle, it's not going to change my life that much. What do I have to lose? But if you experience something like really an elevated spiritual consciousness, not something like, someone drops an LSD tab or something, that's kind of dating myself, I guess. Or, someone has just some kind of experience, but let's say, that's actually, by the way, why I actually joined the Hare Krishna movement. Oh my God, what was I thinking? Anyway, because my my idea was that I was like 19 or 20 years old, traveled all around Europe. I literally survived a motorcycle going off a cliff on a Greek island. Yeah, actually, my girlfriend was in the backseat. And she later blamed herself. I didn't blame her, but she blamed herself later because she was taking diet pills, which in those days weren't so advanced, and they put you in really bad moods. And so she kept kind of like nagging me, watch out with this, is her version of it. I'm not blaming her. And so we were coming around a curve, and I swerved, truck was coming, and next thing I knew, I swear to God, I was like this, holding on to the edge of a cliff, and the motorcycle like bounced down into the bottom, and she actually broke her leg, and she fell on the street side. But anyway, so that happened in Greece, and then I went to North Africa, was held up at knife point in Morocco, and somehow talked my way out of it. And so I was having all these adventures, went to the Arctic Circle to see what that was like. And so I was kind of going here and there, and plus I was from Berkeley, so I was in the middle of all these revolutionary activities. After experiencing all these things, I was on a train going from, I think, Malaga, from southern Spain. I was taking a train back to Madrid to go to Paris. And I was keeping a journal. And I came to a serious decision that the material world seemed absurd to me. There was no ultimate purpose on the material level, which is true, because on the level of materialism, I mean, a priori, in terms of just simple logic, there can't be a metaphysical purpose. Okay, sorry about this, but in a strictly materialistic worldview, you cannot have, real teleology. The Greek word telos means a goal, an object. And teleology means the belief that there are objective purposes in life, not just purposes you give yourself. Like, for example, you can say, okay, today I'm going to go out and buy an ice cream cone. So you gave yourself a purpose, and you can decide, no, I'm not going to do that. Or you can decide, I'm going to get a college degree. So we give ourselves purposes all the time, big and small. Teleology goes beyond that and says there are objective purposes in the universe. So the question, why was I born, actually has an answer. And so if you, I don't know if I have time to get into this now, but philosophical materialism is egregiously self-contradictory. But maybe let's save it for another time. I mean, in a logical sense, not because you haven't taken the word of God, not something that's not like that. It's just internally, logically self-contradictory, philosophical materialism. Okay, very quickly, since because we live in a bi-dimensional universe, and we can prove that. I'll try to do this very quickly so I can get back to the other topic. But here's the proof that we live in a bi-dimensional universe, which is both physical and metaphysical. There are certain things that we believe to be self-evidently true, such as that there's a real world outside our mind, and that it's wrong to kill people, innocent people, or somehow people are equal, even if they don't all have the same level of education. They're not all equal athletes. But somehow people are equal. That's the basis of democracy, of course, and of our concept of justice. And it's a very ancient concept of justice, the symbol of the goddess of justice, blindfolded, holding the scales, weighing the evidence, and blindfolded, so there's no preference for anyone on any grounds not relevant to the actual facts of the case. So that's a metaphysical fact. If you believe that somehow people are equal, if you believe that we have anything like human rights, if you believe that it's wrong, let's say, to go and murder innocent people, if you believe those things are wrong, then you live in a bi-dimensional, because none of those are empirical facts. There's no possible way an empirical experiment will show justice, equality, the evil of harming innocent people, and so on. And yet, even to do empirical science, you have to make a metaphysical leap. Empirical science is based on a leap of faith. Scientists would know that if they were required to take philosophy courses, but of course they're not. So, because Descartes, our French buddy, René Descartes, he brought this up in the 1600s in his meditations, He said, what if you are actually just a brain in the laboratory of an evil genius? And that evil genius is manipulating your brain chemically or neurologically somehow to make you believe you have a body, that you live in Texas, that Texas just beat Texas A&M in a football game. And so anyway, that was kind of a side point. But so everything that you think is true in the world, that there is a world at all, is an illusion. None of that is really true. Your brain is just being manipulated. And we already know that virtual reality technology is actually surpassing our ability to detect illusion from reality. For example, digital graphics, the movies. I mean, technology has now gone beyond our ability to detect illusion from reality. And so what if that's your case? In the modern version of it, among modern philosophers, they talk about a brain in a vat. I don't know why they changed the brain in the laboratory, but they wanted to say a brain in a vat. Anyway, so therefore, if you want to do empirical science, you have to make, in a sense, a leap, a metaphysical leap. And that is, you have to decide that as far as you're concerned, even though you can't prove it, there really is a world outside your mind. And so if someone says, well, why do you make that leap? There's only one possible answer, really. And that is that, and this goes all the way back to Aristotle, another good friend of mine. Anyway, Aristotle said that whatever you say, someone can ask you to prove it. And then when you prove it, they can ask you to prove that. You can be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. The example I always give, and I always tell myself, think of another example. This one's getting old, but could you please remind me tomorrow to think of another example? Okay, let's say someone claims that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. And someone else says, no, I don't believe it. Prove it. You say, okay, put a pot of water on the stove, stick in a thermometer, and lo and behold, 100 degrees Celsius, boom, it boils. And the person says, you thought I was going to fall for that, right? I don't believe that's real water. I think you put something in the water to change the boiling temperature. Or maybe that's not real mercury in the thermometer. Okay, now you've got to bring in water testing chemicals and mercury testing chemicals. Then they could say, well, I don't believe those are real water testing chemicals. In other words, you get the idea. So Aristotle pointed out that whatever you claim is true, anything about God, about the football team, anything you claim is true, you can be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. And when that happens, no one can ever claim to know anything. And yet Aristotle says we do know things. So therefore, he said, the way you break this infinite regress is that you have to declare earnestly, not just, as a trick, you have to declare that there is some fact in the world which is self-evident, it proves itself. For example, let's say the sun is in the sky, and someone says, I don't believe the sun is in the sky. So you say, look, there's the sun. So that's all you can do. You can't bring in some kind of light, focus it on the sun. Here, let me make that a little brighter for you. No, you can't. I think, like the old saying goes, you can't hold a candle to the sun. So the sun is self-evident. It reveals itself. If someone claims they can't see the sun, there are three possibilities. Number one, they're physically impaired. Number two, they're lying for some reason. Or number three, are crazy. But it's not possible for someone whose senses, vision is working, roughly normally, who is speaking in earnest and who is sane, not to see the sun. And so if someone claims they don't see the sun, something else is going on. So that's self-evident. So now, in the case of empirical science, scientists, they don't actually go through this because they don't know philosophy. However, what they're doing, in fact, is claiming that the reality of the world outside our minds is self-evident. It proves itself to me by the quality of my experience. And here's another example that we've all had probably thousands of times. Get some water. You go to sleep at night, you dream, and you wake up. And sometimes that's very disappointing because you were having a really good dream. But when you wake up, within a few moments, you conclude, you decide that your waking state is more real than your dream state. That even though while you were dreaming, you didn't doubt the reality of it, although sometimes people dream that they're dreaming, but they're still dreaming because they're dreaming that they're dreaming. So the question is, let's say you're having a dream, you wake up, you make the decision we all do that, okay, now I woke up from a dream, this is more real. And what if I say to you, prove it? How are you going to prove it? There's no way you can prove it. If I say, no, actually the dream was more real and now you think you woke up and actually you're dreaming. So prove it. Prove that that's not the case. You can't. All you can say is, oh, come on in. Hey, Ganapati, we're doing a live show. So if you want to sing or dance, come on. So, as an old friend of mine, he's also a preacher man. So, so when you claim that when you woke up, that's more real, all you can say, and it's actually sufficient, is that it's self-evident to me. The nature and quality of the experience of waking up proves itself to me, and therefore it doesn't require any extrinsic proof. It proves itself. It's self-evident. Now, those are two examples. By the way, our American political system, at least what it's supposed to be, is based on the same principle. That's why Thomas Jefferson, who, you know, he was a learned guy, he knew philosophy, he begins his Declaration of Independence by setting his epistemological boundaries. And he said that, well, not at the very beginning, but soon after, he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal, endowed by a creator with certain inalienable rights. Now, Jefferson, he didn't just think, hey, that sounds good. He was using a technical philosophical term. Because to say we hold these truths to be self-evident means that he could not be pushed by the government of Britain, the king or the parliament, into a defensive posture of trying to justify what he said. Now, Jefferson was also undoubtedly aware of the havoc caused by David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, who was one maybe generation before Jefferson. Because Hume said that you cannot derive a metaphysical fact from a physical fact. Let's say, for example, someone does something that is non-controversially evil, like killing an innocent person. And it's not that by killing that innocent person, he saved 1 million other innocent people. No, there's no redeeming facts here. It's just a wanton, senseless, purposeless act of evil to kill an innocent person. Now, you can study that act empirically and you won't find the metaphysical fact that it's evil. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing about the empirical. You can do, what do they call it? Oh my God, the forensics. You know, do all the forensic studies. You can do psychological studies of the killer. You can do everything. None of that will produce a metaphysical fact that this was morally evil. Yes.
What if I asked people who were familiar with that murder how it made them feel?
Yeah.
And then was able to determine that it was wrong simply because it made people in general feel worse off.
Yeah, I think that's a horrible attempt at philosophy. To say that,
Was-
yeah, because, I mean, to say that it's evil. Because then, what about, for example, in Nazi Germany, where you get millions of people feeling very good about genocide? If people's feelings are the measure, then what about when people feel good about evil and feel bad about virtue? Like, what about, for example, some people feel terrible about the idea of racial equality. They think that's, going to ruin society. So people's feelings can never be the measure of good and evil. Unless, I mean, we're not just talking about people's feelings, but now if someone says, I don't just feel that way, well, let me take it a step further and sort of justify the feeling idea. It's just like we agreed, right? Everything I say, you agreed to. You can see I have a problem. Anyway, so let's say it's true that we do claim that certain things are self-evident, like the fact that there's a real world outside our minds, the fact that we're created equal. Oh, because of Hume, Jefferson, let me finish that up. He said that we're self-evidently equal, but he derived it not from a physical fact, but from a metaphysical fact, that there's a creator. And in the eyes of the creator, we're equal. So to avoid an objection by Hume, he derives the metaphysical fact of equality from a metaphysical fact, namely that we're created by a creator who sees us all equally. So if someone says, it's not merely that I feel it's wrong, but I know it's wrong, and it's self-evident to me that it's wrong. It's actually self-evident to me that it's wrong. That when I see an act of evil, when I hear an act of evil, like that someone killed an innocent person, I know that it's wrong as deeply as I know there's a real world out there. So what we're doing is we're doing the same thing empirical scientists do. Structurally, in terms of philosophical structure, we're doing the same thing. We're saying it is a self-evident metaphysical fact that it's wrong to harm innocent people. And the scientists say, well, you can't prove it, which again shows they wouldn't know philosophy if they tripped over it. We would just say, you can't prove there's a real world outside your mind. And obviously, if the scientist says something like, look, here's an iPhone. By the way, this iPhone is for sale. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so if I say, like, this is my hand, I can touch it, you can touch it, but that's circular reasoning. It's an obvious logical fallacy, because my hand is real only if the world's real. And if the world is not real, my hand is not real. So therefore, the scientist cannot prove within the empirical system that there's a real world, that there's a real empirical world. You'd have to prove it from outside the system, because if you prove something within the same system, you just fall into circular reasoning. So if you believe that there's some sense in which we're all equal, maybe everyone may not get the same SAT score or be able to run the 100-yard dash in the same speed or play a violin as well as another person. But despite all the differences in our abilities, whether musical, emotional, whatever, still we're equal. It's not that if you come to court, you don't get a fair trial because you can't play the violin as well as the person who's suing you, or someone else has more money. Well, actually, you can do that in this country, but still, the theory is that despite our obvious inequalities, in fact, 100% of the empirical evidence shows that we're not equal. In fact, there is zero empirical evidence that we are equal. Whether it's, the 5 of us here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can still count to 5. I'm not cognitively impaired yet. I can still count to 5. So all the empirical evidence, any conceivable empirical test you could apply to humanity will show we're not equal. And yet in establishing our political system, we reject 100% of the empirical evidence, and 100% we create a system based on metaphysical evidence, which is that it's self-evident to us that we're equal. So therefore, if we're basing our whole political system on a metaphysical fact in preference to an empirical fact, and if we're not just being crazy, then we live in a bidimensional universe. So getting back to the original question of, everyone's favorite activity, celibacy, if you really understand that you live in a bidimensional universe and you want to explore the metaphysical dimension because you understand, just like as in the case of establishing a political system based on equality, or for example, the fact that people out of love will give their lives for those they most love, for their children, for other people, for their country, and so on. And so there are innumerable examples where we actually subordinate the empirical to the metaphysical, the physical to the metaphysical. And so if you ask the obvious questions, like, why is that the case? What else must be true if we actually live in a bidimensional universe? And how did the universe get to be that way? And where does it all come from? And so when you start to become interested in that, and you can call it spiritual life or metaphysics, whatever word you want to use, then, if you start to have very powerful spiritual experiences that, I don't want to say trivialize everything you've experienced before, because that's kind of impolite, but are so much greater. I mean, you suddenly see things you never imagined you could ever see before. And it's not a question of, it's not, how should I put it, binary or zero-sum game. It's not that, oh my God, I experienced Krishna, now I hate my family, or I don't care about my country, or, I don't care about anything, or I don't care if I'm healthy or sick anymore. It's not that kind of craziness. It's not that you don't see value in the things you value now. That continues. It's just you realize there is some infinitely greater value, which is what gives value to everything you care about now. And I mean, you find this in all spiritual traditions, not just ours. I mean, any spiritual tradition that really brought people to higher consciousness, all over the world, it doesn't matter whether it's Sufis or yogis or mystic Christians and Jews or Buddhists. I mean, it's everywhere in the wisdom literature of the world, you find people giving these testimonies. They've been doing so for thousands and thousands of years in every corner of the earth, that when their eyes were opened, when they saw this higher truth, they realized, wow, I really had no idea of what's out there. And at that point, you really want to preserve that consciousness. You don't want to lose it. Because you realize that if I lose this consciousness, I will fall back into illusion. Yes?
What would you say it is about Krishna and Bhakti Yoga that brings us toward Krishna consciousness, like on a metaphysical level?
Krishna and Bhakti Yoga, funny you should ask that. I'm also, an authorized representative of Krishna and Bhakti Yoga. So, we accept, those of us who drank this Vedic Kool-Aid, we accept, just kidding, we accept that that Krishna is the absolute truth. Not instead of someone else's God. In other words, we're not saying that other people are not worshiping God. They are. I mean, I think people who in the name of God kill innocent people, no, I wouldn't include them. But I would say anyone who is trying to worship God to the best of their ability and, is a reasonably decent human being, is not committing atrocities in the name of religion, I would say they are worshiping God. There are different conceptions of God because because you could say that these conceptions are filtered through different historical cultures. And for example, if you look at the history of art, even to make it simple here, just look at the history of Western art. And let's say you probably do this actually to get a doctorate in history of art, but let's say you studied the way that trees are depicted throughout Western art history. And you looked at all the different schools of art. And but the point is, those are all trees. I mean, the fact that trees, even though their trees have been depicted in so many different ways, from kind of quasi-abstract to photographic realism to romanticized, surrealistic, and I'm actually pretending that I know something about art. I'm just like throwing out these words, but I know a little bit. So now there was a, how should I put it? There was a philosopher, a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher named Xenophon, who thought he was really clever. And he's the first person, I think, that's known to us in the West who gave an argument against what he considered to be anthropomorphized gods, like making God in your image. And he said that, look, he said, we Greeks have gods, and the Egyptians have gods, and the Thracians, I think it's now Albania, Thracians have gods. And if you look at all these pictures and statues of the gods, you know, guess what? Greek gods look like Greeks, and Egyptian gods look like Egyptians, and so on and so forth. And he said if horses and lions and oxen had hands and could draw, you'd get gods that look like horses and oxen and lions and everything. So I think he thought this was really like a slam dunk or something, but actually it's not. It's actually not a strong argument. Going back to our art analogy, that even though artists have depicted trees in many different ways, in different trees, depending on, you know, what latitude they lived in or what kind of geography, but still, trees really exist. And the fact that, for example, Jesus actually was a historical character to the best of our knowledge, and the general evidence is, generally the evidence is given is that he's described by Roman historians who had no religious interest in Jesus whatsoever, but who say that there is a man named Jesus, and apparently he was born in Galilee, and he has some followers in Israel, and his followers claim he's a miracle worker. So as far as the historicity of Jesus, I won't go into that whole question, you know, about there's a lot of academic issues there, but at least the fact that there was a person like that from third-party sources. So, so even though people, I mean, the fact that people tend to filter God through their own psyche, their own psychology, their own cultural and emotional experience, still there's a family resemblance. I mean, the fact that people all around the world are reporting this would tend to indicate there is such a person, not that there isn't. And further, I would say that just as I think it's logically the case, just like there can't be a square circle, I think logically empirical science can never give a complete description of reality, for the simple reason that empirical science itself depends on all kinds of metaphysical assumptions, and yet it focuses only on empirical facts, and therefore, since we know there are metaphysical facts in the world, empirical science a priori can never give a complete description of reality. I would say also that an impersonal concept of God, that God is just energy or light, I would say also logically can never provide a complete description of reality. And the reason is that there's a principle that we all accept. In fact, it's used in almost every academic department in your school, and that is that causes are somehow present in effects. For example, let's say you're taking a history course and you're studying something that happened, like the Vietnam War. And so you raise the question, how did that happen? Like how did America get itself involved in this? And then you have to go back to the cause. So you have an effect. There was a war. America did go to war in Vietnam. Now, if you're saying why, how did that happen? Then you reverse the time arrow. The events leading to America to the war in Vietnam were unidirectional. They went in a certain direction. This happened and that happened and this caused that and that caused this. And so it goes in a certain direction. Time moves in a certain direction. And yet to analyze it, you have to reverse that direction. You start with the effect and you go step by step back to the causes. You do the same thing in medical research. You do the same thing in psychological research. You start with a condition, like Freud started with a fact that a lot of people are messed up in this world. And so he was trying to understand, how did they get that way? So then he reasoned his way back, and some of his stuff was good and some of it was kind of really neurotic. But in general analysis, like there's a fender bender on the road, right? You start with the effect, and all the insurance people rush out, and where are the skid marks and where are the dents on the cars? What are the position of the cars and everything? They're reasoning backward. That's how what you do is you go backward through the causal chain. So in the same way, this universe is an effect. It's an effect. And in a sense, there's an argument, a philosophical argument called the argument from contingency, which kind of demonstrates why this world must be an effect. So I'll go through that very quickly. If we look at everything in the world, everything you've ever experienced in this world depends on something else for its existence. Like the chair you're sitting in, someone built the chair. Or the planet you're on, it has a history. The planet has a history. Your body has a history. Without your parents, you would not be inhabiting that fine young body. And so therefore, in philosophical terms, said that everything in this world is contingent, which means it depends on something else for its existence. So how will you answer the question, if everything in the universe depends on something else, why does anything exist and not nothing? I mean, you're welcome to try if you want, but it's a tough one. Why does anything at all exist, or how can anything at all exist if everything that does exist depends on something else? So therefore, the idea is, I'm talking to the University of Texas. So therefore, the idea is that there must be something which is not contingent, something which exists independently, autonomously, which you can call God or some other word if people have, emotional problems with that word. So, Natalie, could you move the micro? We lost Emma, actually.
Sorry, we had to plug it back into the charge. Can you see?
Yeah, there's good old Emma again. So therefore, when you are trying, let's say you're philosophizing, what is God? Is God personal? Is God impersonal? The idea here is that you have to posit, you have to propose some concept of God, the characteristics of whom or which are adequate to explain the world as you know it. In other words, if you say, I think God is this, and then you say, is it reasonable to presume that a God of that nature could or would produce the world as we know it? And if the answer is no, it's not a great idea. So what we find in this world is that it's a very personal world. For example, if you study what they used to call the chain of being, I mean, evolution, we won't get it all the... By the way, we're actually moving into a post-Darwinian phase. It's actually quite interesting because with revolutionary advances in microbiology, scientists and philosophers of science are seeing that living organisms at a microbiological level are actually like hundreds, if not thousands of times more complex than they ever imagined before, and millions of times more complex than Darwin could have known at his time. And so therefore, the idea that these like ridiculously complex mechanisms, like your body, just kind of, the wind blew, the rain fell, and then maybe there was some seismic activity, and, what do you know? Here are these like ridiculously, infinitely complex supercomputers, which are our bodies. So more and more scientists, not religious people, not, preachers, just scientists and philosophers at really good universities starting to say, wait a second, we've got to come up with a theory which matches what we now know about microbiology. Anyway, I won't go into all that, but there is actually an intellectual revolution going on even as we speak. I mean, it moves at its own speed, historical speed, but it's happening. It's happening all over the place for historical reasons I won't go into now, for sort of very obvious historical reasons. But so the idea of a person, we are personal, and if we study the evolutionary chain, however evolution occurred, the more advanced a creature is, in our view, the more developed its personality. Like if you say that, I gave this example last night, that, I have a pet worm and he has a great personality. Like he really understands me. Very unlikely. Or if you say that, yeah, I would say my frog is actually my best friend. That's not going to happen. People say, dog is a man's best friend, or when you get into certain more advanced mammals, some people are really attached to horses, like the horse whisperer. And so when you get into advanced mammals, yeah, they are more intelligent, they are more personal. And when you really live with animals, I was going for physical therapy in San Diego recently, and one of the ladies there spends quality time with goats because she works in an animal shelter. And she was, she's not like a religious person. She was just swearing that every goat has her own personality. The ones who I work with, they know me, they react when they see me. And these are goats. Very few goats are admitted into the University of Texas because of their low SAT scores. But so the point is, as creatures become more intelligent, they become more personal. And when we get sort of like a self-feeding monster, like certain people that have high political positions in this country, who really cannot do anything except consume, try to accumulate power and wealth, and obviously don't care about other people, then we consider that person to be primitive. The more personal people are, the greater their powers of empathy and sympathy, the more advanced we think they are. So therefore, if that's the vector, if that's where evolution goes, if you're talking about a supreme being, you would expect to find a supremely sympathetic, empathetic, conscious, personal being. And to propose an impersonal being, first of all, it goes against everything we know of just the advancement of consciousness in this world, and also it simply cannot explain the world as we know it. Because why would an impersonal deity create a world? First of all, an impersonal truth wouldn't create anything, because that's a personal act. I mean, you don't accidentally create a universe. And why would you do it? You couldn't have a motive, because if you had a motive, you're a person. So, I mean, you got to really dig down into what it means not to be a person. No motives, no intention, no purpose, no values, no activities. And the idea that something like that can logically explain the world as we know it, I think is absurd. So if we can get over this, I mean, I know when I went to college, centuries ago, it's like one of the first big words you learned was anthropomorphism, which made you think you're intelligent. But anyway, yeah, go ahead, Leelananda. What's that?
Then why Bhakti Yoga?
Why Bhakti Yoga? Because if you take it up, I get a cut. This is how I make a living. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. So why Bhakti Yoga? First of all, the word yoga here means a process, a systematic process. And so if you want to be a great athlete, if you want to be a great musician, if you want to be a great anything, a great scholar, if you want to be a great parent, or if you just want to have a great relationship with another person, you have to really practice. It takes a lot of work. And so it's just the way the world is that you cannot be really good at anything unless you practice. And so if you want to be really good at higher consciousness, you have to practice. You get what you pay for. As far as bhakti means devotion or love. And if you think about it, what else could be a candidate for the highest state of consciousness if not pure love? I mean, having a perfect golf swing, or so. I mean, if you think about it, when people fall in love, they know when you really fall in love, and it turns out you weren't deceived, and you didn't, as often happens, you didn't fall in love with your own image of a person, and then when you found out who the person really is, it's like, can I get my money back? So, but let's say you really fall in love, then what person that has ever really fallen in love would ever think that something else is greater than that? And so real love, not the kind of jealous, possessive love that's just a psychological disorder, but when you really love someone, you become generous, kind, caring. Real love, not possessive mania, but real love brings out the best in you. It brings out just who you really are as a generous spiritual being. And so bhakti yoga means a systematic practice of love. And that may seem contradictory, because we may think love is just spontaneous. How can you practice loving? Well, ask anyone who has successfully sustained a relationship or a marriage. Everyone I've ever met that sustained a marriage will say, yeah, it took a lot of work, because it's only too easy to leave somebody. And it takes a lot of sincerity and determination and diligence to really, because people are different. And they sometimes irritate each other. And so you can practice loving. You can practice being unselfish. You can practice forgiveness. You can practice remembering the good qualities of the person you're trying to love. Of course, there are lines that the person can cross in which you are justified in exiting, but I'm saying assuming the other person is being true to you and faithful to your mutual commitment, and you have to practice to achieve pure love. Pure love is a great thing. It's not just that every time your love endorphins start firing, you have achieved pure love. As we know, endorphins can be very misleading, and there are billions of people who thought they were really in love who then actually not only rejected the other person, but in many cases thought, that person becomes your number one enemy, or that's the last person in the world I ever want to see again. Because the more you become attached to someone, the more power they have to hurt you. And some people exercise that power. And so to achieve real love is it's a lifelong dedication. And so in the case of bhakti yoga, dedicating yourself to developing spiritual love, where you actually love every soul. You love every soul. It's like, for example, let's say you grew up in a family and you have a sibling you never met, a sister or brother you never met. And then for whatever reason, we can invent, all kinds of stories. Let's say you never met this person. And then finally one day, it could be, for example, in the old days, because they lived behind the Iron Curtain. Or, sometimes people are separated by political regimes. And then finally, after years, you are reunited with someone, a parent or a sibling. And immediately there's love for that person. If you love your family, if you're a fortunate person that loves their family, and you find someone finally who is part of that family, you love them at once. And immediately there's a bond. And so in the same way, when you really understand that we're all souls, then when you see anyone, you realize that's my sibling. Because there's really only one family in the universe. We have Radha and Krishna, the supreme male, supreme female. And so when you really understand that, then every soul, no matter what kind of body they have, no matter what kind of human body they have, no matter what species they're in, you may not be able to have an intelligent conversation like with a squirrel, but still you can see that within that body is an eternal soul. That's my eternal sibling. They just somehow, took a few wrong turns and ended up in a squirrel body, but they'll bounce back. And so this universal love, this universal empathy, it comes from Krishna consciousness. So Bhakti Yoga, if someone's got a better idea, tell me and I'll join that. But the point is, like, Krishna also, the idea that God is infinitely beautiful, not just infinitely jealous. God doesn't really need a bunch of 12-step programs, for anger management and jealousy and et cetera, et cetera. And so Krishna is infinitely beautiful. The idea of God is infinitely beautiful. It's, I concluded this is the best game in town. And if someone could show me something which is a more sublime conception, I will seriously consider it. I'm not a religious fanatic. I actually continue to do what I did the day I walked into Hare Krishna temple. Oh my God, I walked in. Anyway, so I'm doing this thing. I'm pursuing my rational self-interest. And the reason I started Krishna West is because I don't just do things or believe things because someone told me. I want to see the logic of it. I want to see that it's reasonable. And so everything I'm doing personally in my life, I do because it's reasonable and it works. And things that, like certain rituals or certain even superstitions that many people that chant Hare Krishna thought, you got to do this, you got to do that. I just thought, well, no, it doesn't make sense to me. So, have fun if it pleases you. But so in Krishna West, what we're presenting is a spiritual science, not superstition, not mythology, not just sort of, faith alone, but a true spiritual science. And also, last thing I'll say is we're not using you as guinea pigs, because this spiritual science has been working very effectively for thousands of years. So it's not that, I invented a new religion, now I want to try it out on you. It's not like that. This has been going on for thousands of years. And if you read even ancient histories of India, such as there was a Greek ambassador to India about 2,300 years ago named Megasthenes, and soon to be a major motion picture. Actually not, but so Megasthenes wrote a best-selling book about India in Greek called Indica, which means about India. He describes this amazingly advanced society, a society with human rights, with animal rights, with, it's just amazing. It was the richest country in the world at that time. And just a very enlightened society practically free of crime, free of exploitation. It's amazing. And so, and the yoga, of course, yoga came from this. So what we're presenting to you is a process, a spiritual science, which in the past produced a great civilization and can do so again, and can also infinitely enhance our own consciousness. So that's why we do Bhakti Yoga. That's why I do it.
Yeah. Do you think we ought to emulate Krishna?
We ought to emulate, did you say? Yeah, I think we should emulate Krishna. In fact, Krishna invites us to emulate him in the Bhagavad Gita. He says that that even though I don't have to perform religious duties because, based on who I am, but still I do it anyway when I come to this earth because I want to set a good example. Because if I don't do the right thing in my name, other people will not do the right thing. It may not affect me, but it'll affect them. So Krishna does say, yes, that it's everyone's duty, everyone who is on the spiritual path or Krishna himself, it's their duty to set a good example for others, not to mislead others. And at the same time, there's certain things Krishna does that we can't do. For example, let's say someone's an Olympic medalist in the high dive and you're just a beginner. Don't emulate them. I mean, you can study them and try to learn the technique. When I was at, there's this really nice little college town in West Texas called Alpine, Texas. It's 4,000 feet up. It's amazing. It's this college campus it has no parking signs. In other words, you just drive on the campus and park anywhere. I mean, if you're at the University of Texas, you know, you drive on the campus and you can't park anywhere, which is like practically every university nowadays. But yeah, so it's a really nice little college town, the natural food store, town of like 6,000 people. And so I was walking on the campus and I saw this ad for the skydiving club. And it said, if at first you don't succeed, don't join this club. So we can, usually the distinction that's made is you can follow Krishna, but you can't imitate him. If someone is a great personality, there are certain things you can't imitate, you can't do, but in terms of the basics, yes, we should follow. And Krishna himself comes to this world, that the word is avatar. In Sanskrit, ava means downward, and tara means crossing. So when a great soul crosses from the spiritual realm down into this realm, that's called avatara. That's actually what the word literally means. So, yeah, so Krishna comes and other great teachers come, try to help us, try to teach us, try to give us an example. Yes.
So it's yes and no.
The what?
So the answer to that question is yes and no.
Yes.
So yes, we should follow some things, but there are limitations.
Yeah, there are things they're just far, far beyond us. But in terms of the basic practice of spiritual life, yes, Krishna does set an example.
So as souls, what is our relationship to Krishna, and how did we like come to get into this like cycle of incarnation?
Very good question. Our relationship to Krishna is, you could say, like the part to the whole. For example, Prabhupada used to give the example of the hand, which can only feed itself by giving the food to the stomach, to the mouth, and to the stomach. And so even if you have the most powerful hand in the world, you can crush stones in your hand, you still can't eat. The hand still can't eat. And another example it's given is, this is from the Bhagavatam, an ancient text, watering the root of a tree. There's a lot of jokes in Sanskrit, actually. If you look at the ancient text, they had a real sense of humor. So one word for a tree is padapa, which means a foot drinker, because a tree drinks through its roots, its feet. So the actual verse in Sanskrit is yatha taror mulani sechanena, just as by watering the root of a tree, tripyanti taskanda bujopa shaka, that the trunk of the tree, the branches, the twigs, everything is satisfied. And so when we try to enjoy separately, it's like the hand trying to eat. The hand will just starve. So when we try to engage in hedonism at some level and simply try to pursue our own pleasure, what we get is probably the most neurotic society in recent history. You know, it's sort of like, Planet Pharmaceutical. And so we have an extremely neurotic society. All the studies show that, well, you know the stuff. So that's because that comes from people. It's like if you take a leaf on a tree and you pull it off the tree, the leaf loses its life. I mean, a leaf, in a sense, is part of a living system. And the leaf is nourished by being part of a tree. When it's separated from the tree, it just, it dies. It no longer shows symptoms of life. So when we separate ourselves from the source of our existence, just like the source of a leaf is the tree, the whole tree. And so Krishna is the source of our existence. When we detach ourselves, separate ourselves from the source of our existence, we begin to lose everything. We begin to lose our spiritual qualities, which are, as souls, we have unlimited happiness. We're completely satisfied. We have inconceivable knowledge. And we live forever. And when we separate ourselves, the word yoga means to connect back to the source. And viyoga means to separate. So when we separate from the source of our own existence, then we begin to lose those three qualities. Rather than experiencing eternal life, which is just, that's who we are, we experience mortality. We enter into bodies, material bodies, we identify with those bodies, and then we have death experiences. Now, obviously, we could not possibly be our bodies. It's logically impossible. Because at the deepest level, as much or more than you know anything, that let's say when you had a child's body, that was you. You were the child. You were the, young teenager. Now you are the student. It was you, and yet it's not the same body. You are what you eat, and we are constantly changing the body. And so the body, just divide your age by 7, and that's how many times you've already reincarnated. So the question, is there reincarnation, is not really a serious question because you've already done it. Just divide your age by 7. The question, of course, is does it continue? But you can't be the body because, like the skin replaces itself in 2 weeks. You get re-skinned every 2 weeks. And in 7 years, your whole body. And so, but it's still you. So the question is, who are you? And when you reconnect to the source, it's like if you say you turn on a lamp and the light doesn't go on, it's because it has somehow become cut off from the electric source. And you've got to find out where that separation took place, reconnect it, and the light goes on. So you just have to reconnect to Krishna and the lights go on. You remember. Krishna actually says, there's one very poignant verse in the Bhagavatam where Krishna says to a soul that's suffering, Api smarasi mang, do you remember me? Do you remember me? And so you can remember, actually Plato also teaches that. Plato is kind of like sort of a halfway Hare Krishna guy. So, and Plato, he wrote a dialogue called the Meno, which he talks about remembering knowledge. The soul remembers what it already knew. And so when you remember that you're eternal, you lose your fear of death. When you remember your true happiness, which is unlimited, you don't have to beg unworthy people to make you happy. You don't have to run all over the world trying to find happiness. You can just sit down anywhere and feel amazing happiness. And that gives you the luxury to choose the right friends. It gives you the luxury only to do what with your intelligence you know to be the best thing for you. And you remember all this spiritual knowledge. So it's just a question of reconnecting. That's what the word yoga means. It's that reconnecting. Actually, let's have a couple more minutes because 6 o'clock my time, I guess 7 o'clock your time, was people are coming from the university, Arizona State University. Is that you too?
Yes.
First victim already arrived. Yeah, so. Yeah, University of Texas is a great school. And I think it's just so inspiring to see that that this knowledge is being offered at that school. It's one of the great universities in the world. So, any other point?
Just to clarify,
Yes.
what you're saying then is that like this continuous part of ourselves, that is like the leaf on the tree, which is Krishna.
Yeah.
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 That's right.
That's right.
You are.
You-
Oh, echo. So I can turn that down a little bit. Yeah, you are. It's funny. The sort of the terrible irony in this world is that it's a world of vanity, especially nowadays. My God, it's sort of like the in thing now is narcissism. But I used to, up until recently, I lived for many years very close to UCLA, which has a very beautiful campus, and so I would walk there almost every day, take a morning walk there. And so at certain times of the year, they have those tours. I'm sure you see them all the time. They're giving prospective students tours. And I remember they were giving one tour, and the girl was talking about the study abroad program. And she was emphasizing that, like, no one's going to tell you what to do. And, you make your own program and you do what you want. And I was thinking, oh my God, what about the remote possibility that some of the people who have been doing this all their lives actually know more about it? And so it was just this and I see at UCLA, it's a good school. I mean, I got my undergraduate degree there. I don't want to knock it, but, and it is it's a nice school, but yeah, how that schools, they put up banners on campus. They have different themes and every month they put up banners on something. And so I remember it's always like, you're so great and you can do it and you're wonderful. And I was just thinking, oh my God. Like when I was young, people used to value modesty. That used to be a virtue. And the only way to encourage people wasn't just to flatter them and tell them they're perfect and great. People weren't that, needy. So anyway, I don't know how I got into that, but yeah, so I hope you'll really benefit from Krishna consciousness. I hope you really benefit from it. Sorry for that little comment on narcissism. It's just, I don't know how I got into that.
I'm not interested in what you're saying, and if you want to continue, I liked what you were saying. I was interested in hearing more.
What more could I say? Humility is really a virtue. Not low self-esteem, not that you think I'm terrible, I'm bad. No, but, to be happy in your own skin, as they say, to be a happy person, but just to also be very happy to meet people who maybe are greater than me. Like I met my teacher, actually at a program at Berkeley on campus. So I first met my teacher, Prabhupada. And for me, it was just this shocking realization that the whole world didn't exist for my enjoyment, which I thought previously, but that actually I was meant to serve. And that by serving, I would really be happy. I mean, not serving because someone is beating me down or I'm like sort of a male version of Cinderella or something, but serving out of devotion. The way good parents take care of their children, it gives them the greatest happiness to do things for their children. And so to realize that by serving, by helping, by trying to help other people to be happy, that I can really be happy. That is the greatest happiness. That ultimately there's an infinitely beautiful, infinitely intelligent person with whom I can have a great relationship. And if I can establish that relationship, all my other relationships will be healthy and appropriate and pleasing to me. Because I'll have criteria, I will have judgment, and I will know what my real self-interest is, and I will choose relationships, friends, and so on, partners, who actually really respect me as a spiritual being who understand me, who are dedicated to my ultimate self-interest and not just to exploiting me for their own emotional or physical needs. So it's one-stop shopping for a great life. And today is, what is today? Black Monday. So so yeah, what's that?
What sort of values and like ideals should like a Krishna devotee like have besides love and community? Like what sort of way should we go about our lives?
Well, first of all, disciplined life, regulated life. In fact, psychological studies show that having certain regulation in your life, like getting up approximately the same time every day and having some kind of routine, not an oppressive routine, but just having an organized, disciplined life actually makes people happy. It actually creates a sense of happiness. And when too much freedom just leads to depression, actually, because you don't have a sense of purpose in your life. And so we have a practice, a bhakti yoga practice. We tend to rise early, and it's not difficult to get up early. It's difficult to go to bed early because you're only going to sleep so many hours. And if you think about it, in before people moved into industrialized cities, when they lived in nature, I had the experience of living for a year or two on a farm we have beautiful. It's like Shangri-La, a beautiful farm in Brazil, and there was no electricity. We just had gas lanterns. And when you're living in nature, when the sun goes down, you just kind of head home. That's what people do. When the sun goes down, it's time to go home. And, maybe you have some lanterns or some lamps or candles for a while, and you actually start to get sleepy. And then you take rest you take rest somewhat early, and then you get up early, and there's things to do. And every day you witness the incredible, super high-tech light show, which is called sunrise. It's staggering. I mean, it's really amazing. You meditate early in the morning, you meditate, you see the sunrise, you fix your consciousness, or as they say nowadays, and what do they say in yoga classes, fix your intention. So you fix your consciousness, you're happy, more than happy. And then you spend the day doing your duties and trying to do all the good you can for other people and for yourself. And that, of course, involves spiritual practice of chanting. It involves offering our food, because just like hopefully you wouldn't go to a Whole Foods market and pick out the stuff you want and just walk out with it. Technically you're supposed to go to the cashier and pay for it. And so in the same way, it's not that God wants to do business with us. It's rather that gratitude. Ingratitude is a very ugly thing. I mean, if you really imagine yourself, if you really tried hard, you really put out to help someone, and they don't even say thank you. That it's they don't care anything about all that you've done for them. It just means nothing to them. They're just moving on to the next sucker. It's it's not a nice thing. And so gratitude, I think, is sine qua non. It's just an essential quality for a good life. We should cultivate gratitude. We should remember to be grateful. And the miracle of food, the fact that food grows. You can't eat plastic. I mean, the fact that it rains and food grows, it's miraculous. And the fact that we can sit down and nourish ourselves, and it's absolutely a time to be grateful. And not to be grateful, it's just to be something like a spoiled brat. And so it's just a time to be grateful. And so there are, we offer the food is a word we use. It's just really to show some gratitude, to understand that something has been given to us with love, and that we should receive it, with love and gratitude. And then, I mean, this is a tough planet to save, as you all know. You know, whether it's environmentally or spiritually. And so it's just like, for example, if you ever watch those movies where, you know, some alien's going to take over the world, or an asteroid is going to collide with the Earth, destroying life as we know it. And suddenly there's no time for trivial pursuits. Everyone has to work together. And so when things really get tough, people have to cooperate. And so working together to try to spiritualize the world, because otherwise all these freedom movements, I mean, if history shows one thing, it's that today's freedom fighters are tomorrow's tyrants. There's a very long history of that. And so unless people really become spiritualized, they're just going to be selfish like everyone else. I mean, look at Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, or I won't even talk about American politics. But if you look, I mean, there's just too many examples of people who were the great freedom fighters then just turned into the most selfish tyrants. So unless you really purify yourself, your consciousness, unless we free ourselves from greed and lust and just the desire to use and abuse other people, then, you know, how are we really going to change the world? That's what inspired me when I, signed up. First of all, I wanted a spiritual science. I didn't want a new religion. I already had a religion. My parents gave it to me. So I was absolutely not in the market for a new religion. And I absolutely was not looking for rituals. I was not looking for, mythology or superstition. I just wanted one thing. I wanted a spiritual science. Non-sectarian, non-fanatical, a spiritual science. Actually, I made that decision on a train going from the southern coast of Spain to Madrid. I've been all over Europe, and I already seen America. And I wrote in my little journal that I wanted to focus on understanding the highest truth. Not just belief. I wasn't looking for a belief system. I was looking for experience. I didn't want to just, pop a pill and go into some consciousness. I actually wanted to go to higher consciousness, stay there. I wanted higher consciousness to be my new normal. And I want to do it through a spiritual science, not something we just, a spiritual science, a real spiritual science. And that's what probably my teacher gave me. And so that's what I'm trying to give to other people. Not a new religion, not simply something to blindly believe in, not a warm, fuzzy community for people that have trouble making friends, but rather, because I actually had lots of friends, but a spiritual science, a non-sectarian, non-fanatical spiritual science, so that you can rise to this incredible higher consciousness and just live there. So now I do the ad where you all send money in and I pray for you. Just kidding, that was a joke. So thank you all very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to meet you guys. And it really is, not just saying this, be polite, but it really is a pleasure for me to meet all of you and to see that all these, really amazing young people are somehow trying to understand the spiritual science. It's very encouraging, because you really are the future hope of the world. Your generation, eventually, and is really the hope of the world. So, auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, hope to see you guys again soon. Hare Krishna. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Really nice people. Oh, and we're on Facebook. We have people around the world on Facebook. Don't forget to send your checks in. Okay, thank you all very much. See you guys later, actually very soon.